So it's wonderful to be here. This is my first time in this pulpit, and I'm really happy to have been invited to be with you this morning. I am here as I continue actually to get to know the landscape of the greater Boston area and the Unitarian Universalist ministry. I arrived in this work in late fall, and it was quite a winter to settle into the commute into Boston. And I'm appreciating my opportunity to share my journey thus far with you. My second or third day at the Unitarian Universalist ministry, urban ministry, was the 24th of November. I was just beginning my orientation. I still was finishing up my ministry in Rhode Island at a nonprofit that provides basic human needs to those who are homeless, hungry, and poor. But I had taken a few days to begin wading into the work of our urban ministry. This was what I wanted to do: meet the board, meet the staff, figure out the copy machine, learn where to park, the basic things. But that day, Ferguson arrived. That day, a grand jury decided not to indict a Ferguson, Missouri police officer, an officer who had shot and killed Michael Brown, an unarmed African-American teenager. It became the shot heard around the world. And that day, my second or third day of orientation, before I had learned the copy machine, before I had learned where to park, the urban ministry staff came to me. They wanted to say something to our congregations about race and racial injustice. They felt called to make a statement on Ferguson. They felt called to wade into the national conversation on race, and I didn't want to. They wanted to talk about race, and I didn't want to. For the past 10 years, I worked at Macaulay Ministries, a faith-based nonprofit on the south side of Providence. At Macaulay, we served those who were mentally ill, addicted, uneducated. They were white, black, Hispanic, all of them were poor. The work was hands-on and immediate. We worked downstream, where people washed up on the shore after their lives had been chewed up by classism and racism and poverty, after their lives had been chewed up by family violence, by the untreated voices in their heads, by the crashing economy. This was where people came when they had no resources left, no good support systems, not enough tools to thrive in this world as it is, where they came in need of the most basic of things: socks, a toothbrush, a hot meal. Over the years there, over time, one brick at a time, I learned to talk some about poverty. I learned to talk about homelessness. I learned that homelessness was a failure of the private sector's interest in meeting the housing needs of the poor, not a failure of character. But I didn't talk about race, not square on anyway. I loved the work at Macaulay, loved deeply the people that we served, maybe because they needed love so much. But I left that ministry for the Unitarian Universalist urban ministry. Much as I loved my work, I dreamt of doing social justice in a UU context. I wanted to swim upstream. I wanted to stop lives from getting chewed up, and I knew what we Unitarian Universalists are capable of. Our roots in history are deep. Our theological roots in early liberal Protestantism, our old meeting houses, and we are also often at the vanguard of change. UUs were among the first faiths to ordain women and stand against sexism. UUs are among the strongest religious traditions on issues of the earth and other species. UUs were pivotal on gay marriage, confronting faith traditions that tried to silence the movement, and we pushed the issue to the finish line in states like Rhode Island. Our roots are deep, but our branches reach even higher. That extended reach from the past into the future created the urban ministry, is mirrored at the urban ministry. We are one of the oldest social services agencies in the United States. Read our history and you will see luminaries in the Unitarian story sparkling in the historical sky of the urban ministry too. The urban ministry, like our UU movement, also leans into the future. We created one of the state's first domestic violence shelters, one of the early after-school programs in Roxbury. We're an early ally in the prison justice movement. Our history lends us gravitas, and our spirit presses us to lean into the future. I wanted to be part of that. I knew I would be stepping into programs aiming to transform UUs and those we connect with. Among our programs are these: Renewal House, which since 1980 has provided temporary emergency shelter to more than 1,000 individuals and families escaping domestic violence. It was one of the first to shelter male survivors too. The Roxbury Youth Program, which tutors, nurtures, and feeds young people after school. It promotes academic success and welcomes more than 50 dedicated volunteers. Bethany House, a transitional housing program for young women from many backgrounds, including those who've been homeless and have experienced violence or abuse. Jericho Road, a program that matches high-level UU talent to small nonprofits seeking to do good work in the Roxbury neighborhood. And there are English classes for Spanish-speaking neighbors, an Explorers Club giving young Roxbury children weekend fun and learning, a Hope Out Loud concert bringing together urban and suburban choirs, the Jack Mendelson Lecture, all of that. And more than that. The urban ministry is more than that, poised to be more. The urban ministry stands in Roxbury, which in the 1940s became the center of the African American community in Boston, where nearly 50% of the population is African American, just 20% white, where 12th Baptist Church stands, the church Martin Luther King Jr. considered his home church when he was at Boston University School of Theology, where last fall more than 200 people, including those from the ACLU and the NAACP, gathered outside police headquarters to protest racial profiling. And the urban ministry stands too in the midst of 50 Unitarian Universalist congregations that are its reason for being, 50 congregations that lean into change. Congregations that have been reading the book, The New Jim Crow, about the impact of mass incarceration on communities of color. Congregations that have, long before many other faiths, been thinking about white privilege. Congregations that have been asking how to address racism, how to move into justice. The urban ministry stands in these two communities, a community of color and a community of change in 2015. When racial unrest rises to the surface, when racial questions rise to the surface, when hurt rises to the surface, when things are going to change somehow, and we have to pray for the better. But I didn't want to talk about race. Now, my hesitation was in part the good sense of a new leader reluctant to speak before listening. No one should come into an organization and suppose she is the authority. I had a lot of listening to do before I started talking. But on the ride home that night, the night of November 24th, I sat in my car and I realized that beyond the wisdom of listening, I was hesitant to talk about race, to deal with race, and it was something deeper than being new. I wanted to fix problems. I wanted to address injustice through education, training, shelter, but I feared talking head-on about race. I have learned that talking about race is thorny and emotional. I have had conversations on race that were real, and these were contained in relationships built on trust. Oppositional conversations with my beloved father, a conservative Republican born poor, whose father worked in a lumber mill, who was the first generation to go to college, who doesn't see race issues as I do, but whom I love completely, who loves me. And so we can talk about race. conversations of understanding with African American women journalists with whom I worked closely when I was a newspaper reporter, who became my friends over time, and through shared experience of work and mutual respect, we could talk about race. I also witnessed other conversations on race, conversations that harmed more than helped. Manufactured conversations called workshops that were built on good intentions maybe, or maybe were just a way for management to prove it cared about diversity. Conversations built on PR that were grounded in looking good but not really doing good. I saw conversations in which people stumbled into stupid comments on race and faced hard consequences. I saw people hurt because of those comments. I didn't want to make that mistake or cause that hurt. I didn't want to talk about race. And yet at the urban ministry, I saw that I need to be able to talk about race. And so on November 24th, we put out a statement on Ferguson. Frankly, my new colleagues did most of it, took me by the hand and led me there. But I began my journey of finding a way to talk about race. It's not so much a journey of understanding that racism exists. Read the numbers in the prison system, in the court system, the education system, the unemployment system, and it's hard to ignore. According to the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, the United States has imprisoned a larger percentage of its black population than did South Africa during the height of apartheid. While studies suggest that white youth engage in drug crime more than people of color, in some states, African American men have been sent to prison at rates of up to 50% more than their white counterparts, mostly for drug crimes. According to the Economic Policy Institute, 45% of young black children live in poverty compared to 14% of white children. I know racism exists. My journey is to push past my apprehension in talking about it. And so on November 24th, I began a new leg on that journey. And my journey does begin with listening deeply in the hopes that eventually I will have something to say, something that helps. In the 6 months since I arrived at the urban ministry in Roxbury, I've been listening to longtime activists talk about Roxbury in the 1960s, when suburban contractors dumped their trash in vacant Roxbury lots to avoid tipping fees. Listening at a police forum at 12th Baptist Church, where African American mothers and fathers and teenagers shared their grief and their anger. Listening to young activists come to the urban ministry and talk about their hope for making change. And listening to UUs who long to connect with the community in Roxbury and urban Boston. Listening to our members hoping to have real conversation, real relationship across race somehow. I am seeking to listen my way into understanding how our white suburban congregations can most authentically engage with the black community in a mutually uplifting way. Understanding how to create space to talk about race in a way that lets us share our questions and risk making mistakes so that we can be authentic. Understanding how and when talk should lead into action, and whether the answers to racism lie in combating the criminal justice system first, or looking deeply within ourselves to acknowledge our own racism, not because of ill intent, but because we are raised on a daily diet of signals that African Americans are less than or dangerous. Whether we march or pray or sign petitions or all of it, or more than that. Right now, I still am listening. I believe Martin Luther King was right 51 years ago when he wrote, "We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will perish together as fools. We are tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality." In the same way that I, as a straight woman, felt stifled by the big secret that kept gays in the closet, in the same way that I felt my being relax as that secret is banished and my gay sisters and brothers are freer to be who they are, in that same way, I believe we are all imprisoned when our sisters and brothers are imprisoned by racism. We are imprisoned by our fear. I believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every human being and that racism is an affront to that. I believe Ferguson and Staten Island and South Carolina have made it harder for white people to ignore conversations on race and that change is in the air, and I believe that we can be a part of that we must be a part of that. I believe that UUs have an incredible capacity for change and have incredible resources to help make that change. 6 months ago, I arrived at the urban ministry and began to see that the journey before me was harder and more complicated than I'd known. I don't know the answers, but I am ready to begin and I am listening. I hope that you will join me, join us, join the urban ministry, your urban ministry in the weeks and months ahead, that this congregation will keep walking with us on that long road to healing, to justice, to true sisterhood and brotherhood, that you will continue to be part of our work at the UU Urban Ministry to build up truly beloved community. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so.